Welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, the weekly show for nomads, work campers, RVers, and entrepreneurs looking to earn a living or build a business while enjoying the RV lifestyle. This week's host is Rose Willard. Let's settle in and enjoy the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, brought to you by RV Life.
Welcome, friends, to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Rose Willard, your host this week. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Jill Sirianni. Jill is a licensed clinical social worker and a natural-born frugalista. She co-hosts the Frugal Friends Podcast to help people overcome their impulse spending and transform the habits that cause them to overspend. Aside from hosting over 200 episodes of Frugal Friends with 2.5 million downloads, she's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger, The Penny Hoarder, and more for her work on the show. Jill's best frugal move was when she and her husband paid off $60,000 worth of debt by getting creative with their living situations and side hustles. They've lived in 2 different RVs for a total of 2 years, house sat for a year, and have done some interesting side hustles like mobile bartending and flipping their RV. I'm very curious and interested in what Jill has to say about paying off debt while living in an RV. So with that, let's jump into the interview with Jill. Hi, Jill. Welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast. I am excited to talk with you today because you have an interesting story of how you use some non-traditional ways of living, including living in an RV, to pay off $60,000 of debt. And I'm really curious to how and why you did that. So Jill, please give us a little background and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. I'm really pleased and excited to be here with you and your audience. Thank you for having me. I am quite fond of the RV lifestyle, whether it's long-term or short-term. So this is right up my alley. I'm so thrilled to be here. A little bit of background on me. My education is in social work. I have my master's and license in social work. I still do work in the field, but I also am the co-host of the Frugal Friends podcast. So it's kind of a nice blend of talking about personal finances as well as bringing some of the mental health, relational health, emotional health dynamics into that because we are whole people. And certainly the RV lifestyle for me and my husband, we lived in an RV for 2 years at different points, but kind of all combined, it totals up to be 2 years. And that's a big part of my story in personal finance and kind of what helped me towards my social work career, which I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about as we go.
Yeah, we will. Well, that's great. So how did you go from acquiring, I guess you acquired student loan debt, and how did you go into deciding, oh, we're going to choose an RV, we're going to live in an RV? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming from a social work background, I have not traditionally made a lot of money in that space. Just as a career choice, it traditionally is not one of the career paths where you're going to become super independently wealthy really fast. And so of that $60,000 of debt that you referenced, about 33 of that was student loan debt. Other debt was actually the RVs that we purchased. And that was kind of some intentional debt that we took on for future financial benefit. But it was after graduating and seeing this bill come through for my student loans and realizing, putting that side by side with what I was making at the time, straight out of undergrad with my social work degree, I was making $24,000 a year. And my husband was just starting an electrical business. So even though that was 10 years ago, that still was not a lot of money.
Right. That's very minimal.
Yeah. And I'm not one who, I felt the weight of the debt. I'm not one who kind of necessarily had this aha moment that was super pivotal for me. I kind of always knew that, okay, the student loans I'm going to need to repay. And once it kind of became, now it's time for you to repay them, it felt weighty. So my mind and attention was very much on, how do I do this? And how do I do this on a very minimal income? And it wasn't as if immediately we made the choice to move into an RV, but I would say it was a few years into my marriage and having the student loan debt and not making a lot of money, thinking, how can we make an even bigger dent in our finances? And we were on a family vacation with my husband and his family, and he was researching boats at the time. It was kind of this fun way that they were thinking as a family they could buy a boat together, and it could be something we do in the summers. And in that process of looking at boats on Facebook Marketplace, he found RVs also on Facebook Marketplace and just kind of threw it out there as a what if, and kind of playing with the idea, man, this has everything that we need. We could live in one of these. And how much would that cut our expenses? Because usually for most of us, our housing expense makes up anywhere from 30 to, depending on where you live, 50% of our take home pay. And so that was a huge dent of our expenses. So that was kind of a little bit of the journey from, we want to pay this off. How can we do that? Oh, if we cut our living expenses, we could really see a major dent in the debt.
Right. So did your husband have debt as well? And was your husband supportive of paying off your debt?
Yeah. So my husband did not have any debt from college, no loans, student debt loans for him, but he was supportive of me in paying off mine. In the grand scheme of things, $33,000 of debt, while it felt like a lot to me and was more than what I made in a year, in the grand scheme of things, not a massive amount of money compared to what most students are now graduating with, which hurts a little bit to say. It's very not a fun thing to be facing. But he knew about it before we got married. So it was certainly something that we talked about. He was supportive of it, recognized what me having the education that I have, what that afforded me to be able to do. And that was really pursue the field that I wanted to pursue and care for people. And then, like I said, other debt that we then took on together as a married couple included small private loan for his truck, for his electrical business at the time, and then the RV. So we made decisions then together to take on a bit of debt to ultimately help us in the long run financially.
Right. You gain that freedom to kind of do what you want to do without all that stress of that debt hanging over you. Yeah, that's really cool. So you just moved into the RV to live less expensively. And that's kind of like what my family did that too. We sold our dream home, and when the pandemic shut our small business down for a while, and we had always wanted to travel, and we also wanted to become debt-free again and not be so stressed. So we were able to hit the road and use our RV as well. So I'm excited to have this conversation more and dive deeper into the details, because I think it is important for more people to understand that living in an RV can be used as a tool to meet financial goals if done frugally. And it also doesn't have to be forever or full-time. So I do want to get into your entrepreneur side and all the creative ways you made an income while living small, and I will in a bit. But first, I want to go over the word frugal, because you mentioned the Frugal Friends podcast, but I want to go over that word because I think when most people hear that word frugal, they think of being cheap or living with just the bare minimum. But can you explain what's your version of frugality?
Yeah, well, Rose, I'll affirm that there can be this negative connotation with frugality, thinking that it means washing out Ziploc bags or constantly depriving ourselves, getting good at saying no to our favorite things.
Right.
And that might be a version of frugality, but it's not mine.
Right.
And it's not ours within the Frugal Friends podcast. We like to define frugality as being good stewards of all of our resources. So for me, that means being wise and intentional with all of the resources that I have at my disposal. That includes my time, my physical space, my mental and emotional capacities, relationships, and of course, my money. And so I think it's this vision of this whole personhood that I mentioned towards the beginning of our time chatting today, that we are whole people. And I think sometimes finances can be talked about separate from all these other aspects of our lives. But the reality is that our finances bear weight and have impact on our emotional, mental, relational health, and vice versa. These decisions don't exist in a vacuum. And so frugality for me is when I can be wise and intentional in stewarding all of these things, then there's going to be benefit to my finances and my emotional self and my relational self, and you name it. My whole personhood is going to benefit from this and making decisions around my resources in that manner rather than just trying to get a deal or pinch a penny. It's a more holistic approach than that.
Mm-hmm. So you chose to live in this RV to help pay off the debt, and it was definitely a non-traditional way to live at the time that you guys did it. What year was that?
Oh, two different times. The first time would have been in about 2016, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we did it, 2018, 2019, kind of spanning those different years.
Yeah. So why not just live in a small stationary home? You guys also wanted to travel too, or did you stay put when you're in the RV? How did you do that?
Right. We did primarily stay put. I know a lot of people, when we first made the decision, we moved from an apartment into purchasing and living in the RV. And a lot of people kind of assume that, oh, where are you going to travel? You're going to do this whole tour and live that lifestyle, kind of vagabond. And no, it was primarily for us to own a home within our means. That was our primary piece. And especially living where we came from, we were just outside Philadelphia. And the cost of living, of course, for everyone, wherever you are, has gone up as a result of what we kind of saw through the pandemic and the housing market. But even back in 2015, 2016, it just, we couldn't afford a home in our area. And yet it's what we wanted. And so this was buying within our means, being able to have a home at a much less expensive cost than even what renting an apartment cost us at the time. And primarily, staying stationary. But then we did have some travels along the way. But for the most part, we stayed put in one location while we lived in the RV. So it was just for cutting expenses primarily.
Yeah, that's great. You used your tool there. That's perfect. Did you have any fears about living in an RV?
Oh, certainly. I mean, my whole house is on wheels.
Yeah.
Oh, and we did it, but carting that house on the highway and all of
like
my
an
belongings.
Earthquake. Yeah.
Yes. It's okay. If we get into an accident, not only does that affect my vehicle, but it affects my home and everything I own is in this. It's quite a surreal feeling.
Yeah. It's a little stressful.
Yeah. We chatted too, Rose, before we hit the record button about wintering in an RV. And so that was a fear of mine as well, or a concern. I can't say it was this fear that kept me up at night, but we did live in our RV in the north through the winter. And I certainly pipes freezing. And I was concerned about pipes freezing and the pipes did freeze. So it definitely, had some of those difficulties occur.
That's like the struggles, right? Yeah. Any other struggles that you can think of?
I really enjoyed it. Honestly, having purchased an RV is what allowed us to then buy a home eventually. The sale of our RV ended up being the down payment on our house. And so, so much of the good outweighs the bad. But I would say anyone who lives in an RV can understand the connection that you have with your waste is more than anyone wants to have with their waste.
True. Yeah, Glenn, my husband handles all that, but I know about it and we all know about it. And you learn to really live more simply and minimally, and especially with the way that we traveled and RV'd and stayed. We did primarily boondocking out west because it's so prevalent out there, so easy. On the east, it's barely anything here. But out west, we could do that, and we saved so much money. We stayed for free. We knew where to get free water and dumps, and we just knew the whole system, and it was great. And we saved so much money that we could go out there and spend more time in one area and experience more things, and the whole road schooling thing with our boys. So
That's excellent,
So yeah,
Rose.
that was great.
That's another way of doing it. You can travel and keep it minimally expensive. Yeah.
You can. Yeah, it gets a little exhausting over time. So like now my husband and I are, we always talk about we need more of a home base for ourselves to come back to. We use my in-laws right now, but we still want that small something. But like you said, I mean, the housing market, everything is just too much. We cannot afford a home yet right now. We don't want to blow everything just on that because of those ridiculous prices. So we're just still using our RV as a tool, and we're working on other businesses as well. So,
which is excellent. That's one of the things that I saw kind of in the RV life space. And it might have shifted now, but there seemed to be, as I recall it, this idea that once you do it, you're kind of doing it for life. Like, oh yeah, now you've fully bought into the RV lifestyle and you're going to do it forever.
Right.
And I think that's the misnomer of that binary that isn't real. Either you're not going to do it at all, or it's all you're ever going to do for the rest of your life. And there can be this radical middle option where what if I do this for a time to enhance my finances or my quality of life, or have experiences with my children before they're off to college? Like there's so many different reasons that someone might do this, but none of them cause us to be stuck in that decision. There is an ability to kind of choose this for a certain time, experience the benefits of it, and then go on to another lifestyle that might be beneficial for that next season, which is how it served my husband and I, the ability to live in it, save. We renovated both of the RVs that we lived in. So we were able to sell them at a profit to ourselves, recoup the renovation costs, and then make money off of it. So
good for you.
Yeah, there's plenty of things that the RV life can support.
Aside from living in an RV, what are the other unique ways you saved on housing?
Yeah, I love this question because it reminds me of such beautiful times in life. And I will say, this is not for every person, but for my husband and I, we really like to look at the heavy hitters with our finances, rather than focusing in on the $3 coffees here and there and how that's going to help save us money. It's, what are our biggest expenses, and how can we reduce and be creative in that regard to really see a shift in our financial journey and achieving those goals? And so our housing situation has always kind of been at the forefront of our minds of how can we cut expenses in this area? How can we be creative and have some non-traditional experiences? And so you're touching on that. It was RV living, but then my husband and I also for a time lived with and took care of my grandmother. She has Alzheimer's. She's still living. Bless her. She's an incredible 92-year-old woman. And we wanted to prolong the amount of time she had in her own home for as long as possible. And so that was an effort to be able to keep her in her home for an extended amount of time. But she did need care, eyes on her, someone there and present with her. And we did that until her need got to the level where she needed 24/7 care, which it did get to that point. So now she's in a different home, and we obviously are no longer living with her. But we did that for a time. And then we also house sat in a log cabin for a couple. Yeah, that was an amazing experience. Yes. And again, a very non-traditional, I can't say everyone would be able to find an opportunity like that, although they do exist, and the internet is making finding those opportunities so much easier. But this particular couple, they were nearing retirement age, and just before retirement, his company offered him an opportunity to work in Ireland for 2 years. There was a project that they wanted his help on. And so they didn't want to sell their house, but they also didn't want to rent it out because they wanted to come back for the holidays. And so there were just a variety of reasons that led them to say, I wonder if we could find a couple who would just be willing to live in the house, keep the water running, keep the lights on, keep an eye on it. And so we just paid the utility bills and watched their house for that year and a half that they were in Ireland.
How did you come across it?
That was through friends. So that
Okay.
was friends of ours. Their parents were looking for this. And so they connected us with them. But like I said, there are similar opportunities. I'm blanking on it now. If I think of it, I'll get you the link. There are opportunities like that. House sitting. It's
Right.
something along those lines, like housesitting.com.
There's like a
kind
website,
of a thing.
yeah.
But yeah, you can find those types of opportunities online as well.
That's good. Gosh, I love what you did. It's so smart. And just, gosh, you just used what you had at hand, right? You were able to house sit, you did that, and you kind of put yourself out there in those positions and opportunities, and it just kind of led to more.
Right. I think that's a big part of it, is letting people know about what you're trying to do and what you might be open to, and creating relationships and being involved in community. We never know. We can't always replicate all of these experiences, but when we are in community and building relationships with others, it can lead to some of these creative options.
It really can. We found so many wonderful people and all the different things that they do to create an income, and just the community on the road.
Yeah.
It's just awesome. It's great people. So I'm curious how you really got started with the Frugal Friends podcast and how you met Jen, right? Is that her name? Yeah.
So this does intersect with our RVing life. We did in between jobs. I had just quit one of my jobs and I was about to go back to school to get my master's degree. And so in that little interim space, my husband and I decided to take a 3-week road trip. And St. Petersburg, Florida was one of the stops along the way. And at the time, my husband had known people who lived in St. Petersburg, but he'd lost touch with them. So he, on a whim, put something out on Facebook when we had stopped there in the RV, like, anyone in the St. Pete area around and want to get together? My wife and I are here on a road trip. And the people he thought might reach back out to him didn't, but Jen saw it. So my husband had been Facebook friends with Jen because they had both lived in San Diego and worked for the same nonprofit for a year. Didn't talk since then. So it was 10 years later, but they still were Facebook friends as it goes with Facebook friendship. And so she saw it and saw that no one else had responded and thought, oh, I feel bad for these people.
Oh, geez.
And she happened to be getting together with friends, going to a beachside bar that night to watch the sunset, and invited us along. And out of character for her to do that, and out of character for me to hang out with strangers on a vacation. Right. Although I think the fact that it was a 3-week road trip helped me in that. We're having a lot of time together.
Friends.
I can do that. Yeah. And we really hit it off. So she and her husband were in a debt payoff journey at the time. And me and my husband were as well.
Perfect.
And of course, living in an RV is a little bit non-traditional. And so it just sparked that conversation where you don't typically talk with strangers about debt and financial goals. But the two of us did, because she was blogging about her debt payoff journey in the process of it. And so we ended up extending our stay in St. Petersburg just to keep talking. And we just struck up such a friendship. And so then it was from there, one thing kind of led to another, where we decided to start a podcast based on this kind of mutual thing that connected us from the start. We're like, we're friends. We'd love to keep talking. Might as well make it productive and create a podcast around it.
I love that. I love that. So all this time that you were in the RV and traveling, you were still working social work?
Yes. Yep. Various social work jobs throughout the last 10 years.
And you were able to do that remotely?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. So when we lived in the RVs, that was stationary primarily. So I would commute to my social work jobs. I worked in a lot of residential facilities.
Okay. So then you're traveling, you're not traveling, you're stationary, you're working. Then when you kind of traveled off and you met this friend, Jen, and you kind of started this, was this kind of like a side hustle type? Kind of, collaboration. Did you have any other side hustles as well to make ends meet?
Yeah. So my husband and I we had a little business together doing renovations. And for him, for a time, that was kind of his main hustle. For me, it was a side hustle. I'd kind of intersect. And then even when he stopped doing that, I would still contract myself out to paint and do some finish work for people. We also had a DJing business together. So that was something we could do together on the weekends and have fun, get a free dinner. We also had a mobile bartending business. So that was also something that we did on the weekends, primarily at weddings. There's a lot of money to be made in the wedding industry. We didn't stay in it for long, but also, side hustle, you need to think about when do you have time and space to do it and what's going to be something maybe fun or keep you connected with family. And so something that was on the weekend, something that was fun for my husband and I, but also something we could do together because we don't mind working together. I know that's not every couple, but for us, it worked.
Yeah, it's my husband and I we work together too.
That's
so
excellent.
It's great.
Yeah, I sold plants by the side of the road. I've tried it all.
Nice. But these were things that you didn't feel like you were being spread too thin, right? It's just kind of like you enjoyed it, what you were good at, and you just took full advantage of that. I love that.
Yeah. And I think that there are tips in that for other people who might be considering extra income, whether long-term or for a short-term financial goal. I think when we think about a side hustle, one of the things I like to encourage people towards is consider what you enjoy. We don't want a side hustle that is going to be incredibly depleting, right? If you're already working a 40-hour-a-week job, it needs to be something that's relatively life-giving. I also encourage people to consider what's in your hand already, not reinventing the wheel or spending a bunch of money to start this new business, but what do you already have on hand? And I think our DJing business is a really great example of that. My husband, having come from the music field, he was a touring musician for a time and has recorded a lot of music and just has music equipment. And so we already had speakers and microphones and cables. And so it's, we already have all of these things. What can we do with this? Let's go DJ some weddings on the weekend. So not reaching and stretching for, I'm going to have to invest tens of thousands of dollars to do this thing. But what do I already have? What's life-giving? And maybe, especially if your work during the week is depleting, maybe it can be something totally separate from that work. So for me, being in the social work field, and a lot of my days were filled with really traumatic circumstances and events. Having a podcast about personal finance felt so separate from that, something really lighthearted and life-giving, and exercised a different aspect of my personhood that was enjoyable for me. It kind of was this almost self-care plan in a way to do something totally different, totally outside of my 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So those are some things that I encourage people towards in thinking about, what would be a good side hustle? What's life-giving? What's already in your hands? And you wouldn't mind putting some additional hours towards.
Right. No, that's great. Do you have any frugality tips for people living in an RV?
I would say lean into the minimalism that the RV life already demands. I think getting a setup that works for you and is super efficient, but then kind of knowing when you've reached that point, I think that can be the hardest part for any of us, whether we're living in an RV or not, being able to decide what's enough and identifying that point, having this kind of, I might want to streamline this part of our living situation, but then being able to put a pause on the spending in the kind of like setup and decorating. I mean, that will serve us well long-term.
So easy to get caught up on that and just get bigger and better. It's same thing with living in sticks and bricks. It's just, you want more and bigger and better. But no, I like and that's kind of what my family has done. We've just, use what we can right now and what we can be within our means, and don't put too much more on us. It works. It's enough, for this part of our life.
Certainly. Yeah. I think some of the low-hanging fruit too that's specific to the RV life is considering where you're parking.
Yeah.
And you just gave a great example of the ability to find free parking. And of course, when you're boondocking, that really cuts expenses.
Right.
But the RV parks can be almost the same amount as rent of an apartment or a condo.
Very expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. And so considering creativity in that regard, my husband and I, and it took us some time, and I'm not going to say that this is going to work for everybody, but we ended up putting out like a Facebook in search of request on Facebook Marketplace and to our network of friends asking if anybody had property that we could park on. And we kind of specified that we need a hose and
electric.
Yep, a hookup, a 20 amp hookup and what that would look like.
Right.
And so we were able to find less expensive RV parking to be able to be stationary that was less than what the parks were charging.
Yeah. And safe places too.
Yeah, exactly.
Can get a little sketchy sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So any tips for anyone wanting to choose tiny living, not only in an RV, to save money?
I think certainly if this lifestyle is appealing, beginning to make the shifts and changes now. I don't think we have to wait until we're in a smaller space to identify the things that are going to help us not only prepare for living in a smaller space, but help us financially now. So minimizing now is going to save us money, mental space, emotional space, time, wherever we're able to kind of decrease what our space demands of us, the upkeep that maybe even keeping up with a bigger home or lots of things, the demand on our finances that can have. So beginning to minimize now, starting to see how does life feel for me when my wardrobe is smaller, when the items that I utilize in my kitchen are less, when I don't have all of the gadgets, when I'm maybe even minimizing transportation. Do I need all of these vehicles that I might have? Or can our family operate on just, one or two vehicles? Or can a bicycle replace? So kind of thinking through how can I minimize now and what's going to make the most sense for my family in this life season. And then from there, I think calculating the costs. I think sometimes we can think moving into a much smaller space is going to save us. But I think each individual needs to look at that on paper and make sure that it's actually going to be financially advantageous before doing that. Or is it possible to negotiate with your landlord a lower rent payment for maybe doing some maintenance or taking care of your own repairs or mowing the lawn or shoveling the snow? Is it possible to maybe refinance my home and thereby decrease my mortgage? Do I have to sell it and move into an RV? Like, we don't all have to do something really drastic. Some of us do, but are there ways that I can cut my utility bills, my grocery bills, just beginning to do the things now and not waiting for the drastic life change and thinking that's going to be the thing that shifts everything.
Right. So now that you're living in a smaller home, what are some things or values you took with you after living in that small space in the RV?
Yeah, it truly impacted me for the long term. Again, I'm not living in an RV now. I am in a about 1,400 square foot home in Florida, which I love. And I would say the minimalism that the RV life taught me, I have carried with me. So I still have very minimal amounts of utensils, and I found I love cooking that way. I love a very minimalist kitchen and pantry. I have very quality things, but because of that, I don't have a lot of quantity of it. And so it makes cooking more enjoyable. It makes being in my kitchen more enjoyable.
For sure.
I think, but as I mentioned already, the RV connected me to my waste. And of course, that's septic waste. I'm glad to be done with that for now. But also other types of waste. We were very connected with the trash that we were creating. And it caused us to implement practices that just decreased food waste, decreased plastic waste, decreased just waste kind of across the board, which meant I wasn't buying as much stuff. So I wasn't throwing away as much stuff. So this whole kind of cycle in me was interrupted in a really great way that has carried over. Now that I am in a very typically sized home now, I still just have, it's funny, my guests, I have a lot of guests in my home because everyone wants to come to St. Pete, especially this time of year, but they get very confused because my recycling can is way larger than my trash can. I just have like a bathroom sized trash can for like my regular trash. And it confuses people, but I'm like,
great.
I used to live small. And so I'm just used to not creating a lot of waste. So that I'm very pleased with. It really did shift something inside of me where I think I used to be this like, oh, I'll buy something because it's a deal, or I love going thrift store shopping or yard sale shopping. And I still love buying secondhand. I think it's a great way to procure the things that we need, but I'm not doing it for entertainment anymore. I think not being able to bring more into my 170 square feet.
Oh, it doesn't mean you need to fill it up.
Yeah, exactly. It really helped me to realize what contentment means.
Yes, that's very, very important. I hope more people will do that. The world needs it for sure. If you had to do this all over again, the whole paying off the debt, living small in the RV, would you do anything differently?
In jest, I would say I would move south sooner.
Yes.
Wintering in an RV was difficult. It had its difficulties. I'm still glad we did it. I don't live with many regrets. So I would do it. I would do it all over again, but it's not for the faint of heart. I'll say that. Because if you're thinking about the RV life, you might want to consider it in the South. But otherwise, I'm so pleased with it. It did work out well for us. Again, particularly for cutting living expenses. And then for those who might even be handy, there is quite the ability to renovate an RV and sell it and recoup some of your costs.
Yeah, that is true. I just love all this non-traditional ways that you did this, and you just took those opportunities to do what you want to do, even though you weren't making a lot of money. But I guessing now and hoping that your social work is, you've come a long way and you're progressed to better income, and now with your Frugal Friends podcast, that seems to be going really well. So you sound good.
Yeah, I love creativity, and wherever we can implement that in a way that makes sense for each of us as individuals. Again, I know my path in this financial journey is not going to be everyone's, nor should it be.
Right.
But I love to encourage people towards freedom in what might be available for them, that there is an ability to think outside the box. There can be ways to cut some of our larger expenses. I think oftentimes we love to go towards the discretionary expenses and the, the dollar here, the $10 there. Yeah. Thinking, oh, well, my bills are my bills. My fixed expenses are my fixed expenses, and kind of getting out of that mindset a bit, which your audience is already there, are living the RV life and starting businesses. You all know what we're talking about here. So really, I'm just here to applaud that and say, thanks. It can continue to pay off. My husband and I are in a much better financial space than we were a decade ago. And I'm so grateful for that. And RVing and building businesses has been a huge part of the success that we're seeing. And I'm under no impression that it's going to continue. I'm not like Pollyanna over here. Like there's going to be no interruptions to this, but there are some really amazing things and decisions that we can make to steward that well. And I think, RV life and building businesses is a part of that good, wise stewardship.
True. Very true. Well, Jill, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing your debt-free journey. It's been really fun diving into your story and your experiences and advice. And if people want to connect with you and learn more, where can they find you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Rose. It's been a true honor to be talking with you today. If anyone wants more from me and Jen, we've got a podcast, Frugal Friends Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, and frugalfriendspodcast.com. And we're on Instagram as Frugal Friends Podcast. So you type in Frugal Friends Podcast, you'll find us.
Yes. Yeah. It's a great, great podcast. I recently discovered it and have just been really enjoying it. And it kind of reinforces all the things that my family have been doing frugally. So it's great. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to that episode today with Jill. I hope you enjoyed it. I love Jill's message of thinking outside the box and all the creative ways she and her husband put themselves out there to make money, and the fact that they used their RVs to help pay off their debt and work towards a debt-free lifestyle. Being debt-free and living more simply is such a great feeling. Her story is very encouraging, and I hope it got your wheels turning. Be sure to go and check out her podcast, especially if you're interested in learning more about living frugally. As always, we appreciate our guests taking the time to speak with us. See you all next month on the podcast.